Good morning, sir. I appreciate you letting me videotape this. I regret not being able to be there. Since Colonel Graham is out of town today, I'm serving as acting commander of the 3rd, so I'm unable to leave, but glad to join you virtually. Today I'll be briefing you on strike cell and AOC 2.0, which is a concept where we can use the airman's intuition on attacking networks, whether they're social networks, industrial networks, or so on. And we can use that to inflict massive damage on opponents, whether they're configured as conventional opponents, such as ISIS was in the early phases of our campaign against them, or if they're configured as deeply buried opponents working in terrorist networks. Slide. Today's briefing will be unclassified. Slide. Starting with a bit of air power philosophy. As we know, all warriors bring combat capability to the fight. So military hardware, humans and hardware together is the warrior's birthright. What is unique about air power is that air power takes a small number of highly costly but highly effective interventions, applies it through the lens of a systems theory against critical points in that network, which allows us to take a small number of interventions and geometrically magnify their force to create outsized battlefield effects, which is the argument on why air power is distinct from artillery, which is a more cost-efficient means of delivering net explosive weight, but with air power we can put our interventions anywhere we want. In order for that to be effective, we need to know exactly where that anywhere we want is, and that's where systems theory comes in. So whether it's industrial web, Warden's 5 rings, F3EA, what we bring to the fight as airmen is this idea of network software that leverages these scarce interventions, attacking the core logic of our adversaries directly. Slide. One of our present problems is because the conventional AOC has not directly engaged the kind of adversaries that we're fighting today. We're finding that network middleware has actually fallen out of air power. So we have underdeveloped systems theories with inadequate C2 on the conventional side, which ends up forcing us to fall back to linear attack models, iterative approaches with limited volume, and as effective as F3EA is, it ultimately ends up being a linear cycle. What I would argue is that F3EA is the best thing on the market right now, but we may actually be able to provide one better by synthesizing the traditional air power instinct for simultaneous network effects with the continued capability to attack these deeply buried networks with F3EA. Next slide, please. So the system solution, as we just said, air power combat capabilities interpreted through systems theory in partnership with joint partners create these joint geometric effects. It may be, say, the early phase of our campaign against ISIS that actually we can bring a lot of air power to bear in parallel using traditional SCAR models, using the models that allow us to bring force to bear directly as airmen, and then against deeply buried targets, against hard targets, against the kind of targets where we really need much higher persistent intelligence fidelity. That's where we reserve those targets for working with our joint partners, and that ultimately ends up at this tailored network destruction, which would have been devastatingly effective when our adversaries do choose to field forces once again as in the early stages of the ISIS fight. Imagine a world where we could have destroyed all of their fielded forces and then attacked their leadership in parallel. Then we were presenting their leadership with some wicked problems. Next slide, please. Zooming in on the problem we spoke about earlier, ultimately we see that we are providing ISR into the fight, we are providing air capabilities into the fight, but the Joint Forces targeting cycle is fundamentally fueled by airmen, largely AFSOC airmen, but without air power systemic attack capabilities, because ultimately at the end of the day, once those forces are provided, the models through which we bring force to bear against the enemy are ones that oftentimes are fairly distant from the traditional airman's view of network targeting. So we're right now serving as force providers, and our forces are being employed in oftentimes linear theories. Once again, our partners are doing a fantastic job with the tasks they've been given, but I think there's something we as airmen can bring to the fight that actually brings something profound to bear. Next slide, please. The way to bring this about. So taking the traditional ideas of the AOC coming from Warden's 5 rings theory, putting them together with some of the things we know about network attack now, we can imagine a world with multiple interlocking loops where I'm fighting a tactical war, nested in an operational war, nested in a strategic war, where the senior leader who's in charge of all of that can compress or expand those timelines as required depending on how the enemy forces are fielded. This also allows him unprecedented flexibility of actually changing that course without being stuck to a standard AOC targeting cycle, but also without being bound to a linear iterative cycle such as standard F3EA. Next slide, please. So as we previously described, the tactical loop is the first loop in this. So the way that we would imagine this is that you have a target engagement authority who has working for them both a strike cell who has the ability to host authorities with targeteers, intelligence, JAG, and so on, bound up with an intel cell that has the ability to observe these targets real time and verify they are who they are, verify that those targets are destroyed. That circle is always running real time. Next slide, please. That circle is nested within an operational loop, and that operational loop takes that real-time collect and real-time strike and expands it out to a 24 to 48 hour look where we bring in a network analyst. That network analyst takes that intelligence picture and instead of simply staring at individual targets, which oftentimes is not an efficient use of ISR, he allows us to build a holistic network picture and then focus our ISR at specific points where we lack fidelity in that network. That's what the network analyst brings to bear, and there's a number of tools such as Palantir that allow us to do that very efficiently. They present that network picture to a network forecasting cell, which is, imagine a strike cell but 48 hours from now. We're bringing together ops researchers, operators, intelligence analysts, and so on, and they go to the target engagement authority and say, with this network configuration, here's your next 5 moves, or here's your best 5 moves. This move may take out an entire branch of the network if you target these 4 or 5 people in parallel. This move may degrade overall capability, and so on. But they're responding to the senior leader's vision of where he wants that network to go. And this is really the value add here, is the ability to forecast a number of cells and then preload that strike cell with an operational plan. Next slide, please. And ultimately, that's nested within a strategic loop whose optic is from about a week to perhaps out to about a month, where we have a strategic liaison cell who is serving as this cross COCOM C2 solution, able to reach out to the different COCOMs, understand the positions they're in, reconcile whatever needs to be reconciled in order to get the kind of authorities that he would need to prosecute that campaign, and then bring back into that network forecasting cell a sense of where the COCOMs want to go. It may be that if the network forecasting cell is thinking sheerly in network de-optimization, that they're missing that actually there's some reason that a specific part of that network is uniquely compelling. Next slide, please. And so putting this all back together, this is this multiplexing JSOAC AOC. It acts in parallel in multiple times. So we have the tactical cell acting real time inside the operational cell, which is acting both from real time out to about 24 to 48, and then the strategic cell, which goes out from about a week to about a month. And because those are all iterative, that reflects the air power intuition. The tactics, operations, and strategy are not distinct are not distinct entities that build on each other, but rather are different lenses to view the same problem. Next slide. Which brings us to the operational pivot. One of the things that's uniquely attractive about this model is that if we find out that actually our enemy's inside our OODA loop or our conceptual framing's wrong, that target engagement authority can bring everyone back to the present, shift out to a different vision, and then expand out from real time to 24 to 48 hours and so on. Ultimately, this gives us the ability to adapt to a highly dynamic battle space in a way the current AOC does not, but still getting those high volume strikes that the current F3A construct does not. Next slide, please. And ultimately, this is where we could see this in work, synchronized simultaneous attack, looking at a hierarchy and a flat structure. Next slide, please. What those attack strategies give us is fractures and failure even in these highly robust networks. We can disrupt it, we can overwhelm it, we can cause this network to fold in on itself, which is a unique capability, which is a function of being able to do front load many attacks at one period of time, overwhelming the network's recovery capabilities. Next slide, please. And so this simultaneous network attack allows us to do things that linear F3A does not. Once again, more damage against hybrid adversaries. Next slide, please. And that brings me to the end of my brief, and open for your questions, sir.